Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. Today we are talking about 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12 and also 1 Chronicles chapter 20. Now tomorrow we're going to dive back into some more Psalms and we're going to do Psalm 32, 51, 86, and 122. So there's a lot to cover today because this is some pretty intense stuff. So we're going to start out with chapter 11. Verse 1, it says, "In the spring, when kings march out to war, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem." Now, the springtime is an absolutely perfect time for kings to march out to war. Essentially, the crops were growing and the men weren't really needed as badly to work the fields during this time, and the winter rains were starting to let up, so it wasn't all muddy and nasty. So David's forces under Joab had already put the Ammonite threat down. They had already pretty much destroyed most of the Ammonites, but David couldn't leave them unchecked, the ones that were left. So Israelite forces besieged Rabbah, the Ammonite capital. The words "David remained in Jerusalem" here don't necessarily suggest that David committed any kind of sin or folly by staying. His men may have actually even encouraged him to stay out of the battle, and we'll get into more of that later. And David had not participated fully in some other battles that we saw in chapter 10 verse 7, for instance. He wasn't there at that battle. So like I said, maybe his men even encouraged him. If you look at chapter 21 of 2 Samuel, in verse 17, the very end of that verse, it says here that David's men swore to him, "You must never again go out with us to battle. You must not extinguish the lamp of Israel." It was not unheard of for kings to not go into battle and just to send their warriors and their generals ahead to fight while they stayed protected in the palace. This was normal, actually, because if the king goes out to battle and dies, that will be a huge blow to Israel. Israel will lose his king, and that's a big layer of leadership that will go with him. So, keep in mind where we stop here and where we go from this point on. David remained in Jerusalem. Keep that in mind. David remained in Jerusalem. Here we are. So, David, he's up on top of the roof of his palace wandering around, and he sees this woman bathing. Now the text here does not say that she did so intentionally to lure David into an encounter. Some depictions that we see shows Bathsheba trying to lure David in and trying to seduce him, but the Bible does not say anything about there being any kind of seduction here from Bathsheba's part. Now, she was, like I said, she was Bathsheba. She was the daughter of Eliam, and this was one of David's elite warriors, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite, which was another one of David's elite soldiers, and she may have actually been the granddaughter of Ahithophel, which was one of David's most trusted counselors that we'll read about in chapter 23. At any rate, her marriage status rendered her completely off limits to the king. David was not allowed to be with her, but he did it anyway. David called for her, had found out who she was, brought her to the palace, and he slept with her. And then later on, she sent message to him that she was pregnant. Well, this was not good. Now, the narrative here is really silent about Bathsheba's feelings about this whole situation. It doesn't say whether she wanted to, whether she submitted to it, or it was against her wishes. Nothing is mentioned there about that. But David sent orders to Joab, to Uriah, because Uriah was on the front lines. He said, "Send Uriah back home." So Uriah comes home. The whole intention here was to give Uriah a time of gentle relaxation at Uriah's house, where Bathsheba might arrange an intimate evening with her husband to make it appear that he was the baby's father. So he comes home, lays with his wife, and it looks like she's pregnant by him and not David. That was David's plan. But David's plan failed because 2 different nights in a row. He refused to go back because he's like, why would I go back and lay with my wife and enjoy this relaxation while my brothers are on the front line and they're fighting? This is bad. It's a bad thing for me to do this, so I'm not going to do it. So he didn't. And then David went to the extent of even getting him drunk to try to get him to do it, but he still would not go home. So that next morning, after he didn't go home after he was drunk, David wrote a letter to Joab, and he sent Uriah back with this letter. And that letter to Joab said, put Uriah at the front of the fiercest fighting, and then withdraw from him so that he is struck down and dies. So that's what happened. Joab obeyed and did what he said, and then a message was sent back to David that says, your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this matter upset you, because the sword devours all alike. Intensify your fight against the city and demolish it. Encourage him, is what David told the messenger to tell Joab. When Uriah's wife heard about this, that her husband had died, she mourned for him. So this tells me that she probably did have significant feelings for her husband. When the time of mourning ended, though, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. However, the Lord considered what David had done to be evil. Dun dun dun. So here we have what looks to be a happy little family. David and his new wife, Bathsheba, and of course, the son that they bore. So the Lord sends Nathan to David, and Nathan arrives and tells David a parable. Do we know anybody else that taught him parables in the Bible? I think we do. I think it may have been Jesus. He taught him parables. Well, this parable is about a rich man and a poor man and a flock, and actually just one head of cattle, one sheep. And at the end of this parable, Nathan asked him, he said, what do you think about this? And David was mad about it. He said, this man deserves to die. This rich man who took this poor man's one little sheep, when he had all these others that he could sacrifice from his hundreds and hundreds he had, he took this from this man. He took the only thing this man had. That rich man deserves to die. And Nathan replied and said, you're that man. You are that man. And then David kind of realized, oh my goodness, what have I done? And then Nathan said, here's what the Lord says to you. And he goes to this list of things that the Lord has given him and blessed him with. And he says, why then have you despised the Lord's command by doing what I consider evil? In other words, you've done what God considers evil. You struck down Uriah. You murdered him. And then you took his wife. And the Lord says, I'm going to bring disaster on you from your own family. I'll take your wives and give them to another before your very eyes, and he will sleep with them in broad daylight. You acted in secret, but I will do this before all of Israel and in broad daylight. And David responded, he goes, I have sinned against the Lord. Please, 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 this is not good. But Nathan replied and says, well, the Lord's taken away your sin and he's forgiven you, and you're not going to die. However, the son that you're fixing to have born to you is going to die. And after that baby was born, he got really sick. Well, David went through this whole process of fasting and praying and pleading with God to not let this baby die. But it died anyway, because God said he was going to, and he did. And David comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and he slept with her after this was all over with, and she gave birth to another son and named him Solomon. So at this point, chapter 12 picks up with the capture of the city of Rabbah. Joab sent messengers to David to say, I fought against Rabbah and I've also captured its water supply. So therefore assemble the rest of the troops and lay siege to the city and capture it. And there was a reason for this. He said, if I capture it, everybody's going to want to name this thing after me. If you come and capture it, they'll name it after you. So David assembled all his troops and he went to Rabbah and he fought against it and captured it. Basically, at 499 miles into a 500-mile trip, he basically turned it into the driveway. And he took the crown from the head of their king. And that crown was 75 pounds worth of gold. That was unbelievable. So, that ends chapter 12. Now we're going to flip over to 1 Chronicles chapter 20. And it starts in the exact same spot as chapter 11 just started. It says, "In the spring, when kings march out to war, Joab led the army and destroyed the Ammonites' land. He came to Rabbah and sieged it. But David remained in Jerusalem." At that point, all of the stuff that we just talked about happened. Everything that happened with David in Jerusalem, 11 and 12 happened. And then we pick up at the end of chapter 12 of 2 Samuel, here with Joab attacked Rabbah and demolished it. Then David took the crown from the head of their king, and it was placed on David's head. And then we go through chapter 20. At that point, and of course there are some giants involved, and I'll leave this to you, about the descendants of Goliath that were all killed in battles at this point. So tomorrow we're going to dive back into Psalms. I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button and the subscribe button, and of course click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow when we dive into those Psalms again. We'll see you tomorrow.